All right, hello everybody. My name is Nicole Jackson. I am the program coordinator for the Environmental Professionals Network here at The Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome everybody. So if you can, I'm gonna mute everybody, but feel free to put in where you're coming from along with your name in the chat box. Okay, I got some. All right, if you would like to introduce yourself, Lucia, we can get started here.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name's Lucia, and I'm the career advisor for the School of Environment and Natural Resources. I work with students throughout their career development process to support them during career exploration and job searching, interview prep, salary negotiation, and a lot more. I grew up pretty far from Ohio in the Beaver State of Oregon. I received a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources and a Master's in Environmental Arts and Humanities from Oregon State. It's been really wonderful getting to know so many amazing students, faculty, and staff during my first year working in SENR. I'm also just really grateful to connect with everyone, even if we're physically distanced at this time. I want to take just a quick minute to talk about why Nicole and I put this session together. Not long after we vacated Cottman Hall kind of abruptly and started working from home, Nicole reached out to me and said that she wanted to put together a virtual session to facilitate conversations about staying connected during this time. Our goal is to hear from students and professionals about what they're experiencing right now during this period of rapid change, share tips and resources, and potentially take things that arise from today and build on them for future sessions. We've started a list of resources such as job boards, social media sites, websites, community groups that have been helpful during this time. And as you participate, all of you in the audience and also on the panel, please share any tips and resources in the chat box. And I'll be able to see them after the program and add them to this document that we're starting, and I'll share it with all of you next week via email. So, before I turn it over to our panelists, I just want to give a quick overview of career resilience. It's a concept that was already on my mind before the pandemic. And I decided that this session was a good time to start a conversation about it. Career resilience isn't a new concept in career development, and it can be defined differently depending on the context. So here are what I consider to be the major components of this concept. There's the ability and openness to adapt to career and workplace changes. Some of those are changes that we choose, but other ones are ones that we don't have any control over. An emphasis on fostering skills that can be transferred across jobs and even across disciplines, maintaining communication with peers, employers, and mentors, and periodically just reflecting on your career priorities, and also recognizing that some of those priorities are dynamic and not static. So these are important things to practice throughout our lives, whether we're experiencing stability or uncertainty. And I just invite everybody to keep the concept of career resilience in mind as we go through our discussion. I also just want to say that we're all learning. There's no expectation that anyone has or should have mastered career resilience or a new way of working or living in this time. Some of us can't focus on our careers right now. We just need any job that pays the bills. We need to care for loved ones and ourselves. We need to pass our classes. So this session is meant to be a conversation and a way to share resources, but I just want to acknowledge that we all have our own strategies and pace, and that's perfectly fine. So I'll turn it over to Nicole to kind of help with the facilitation of our panel introductions.
Thank you so much for that, Lucia. And just so I can add, I know I just gave my first and last name and my title, but I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that I'm the program coordinator for the Environmental Professionals Network through the School of Environment and Natural Resources at The Ohio State University. It's a mouthful. But most of my work is done behind the scenes and helping environmental professionals, students, faculty, community throughout Ohio connect to resources that focus on professional resources and opportunities to connect to topics around the environment. So I believe Joe Campbell is on the call here or on the webinar here, and that's my boss. So together we work to create programs and content for people to utilize to help build their careers and help connect to one another through the university. And it's an opportunity for us to engage in a different way around environmental jobs, and how we do that, during this pandemic has given us, I guess, more time to think about how to do that differently. So hopefully there's an opportunity with this webinar to explore more of that and to be able to connect to a broader audience to get you more resources and opportunities to network. So again, if anybody during the program has any questions for the panelists, they can click on the Q&A box, and you can chat amongst each other in the chat box. So those are two different things. You want to make sure that you're asking questions in the Q&A, and the panelists can respond to those if they have time during the program. Again, if you have any resources to share, please post those in the chat box. And I will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the program, just so we can make sure people's questions are getting answered. And without further ado, we're gonna start with our first panelist, Masi. She is from Laredo, Texas, and she has a presentation to show with her introduction. So if you would like to start that and share your screen, Masi.
Definitely. So hi everyone, my name is Masi Mejia, and I am the educator for the East Foundation. So a little bit about the East Foundation is we actually were started with the estate of Robert East, who is on the right. He is one of 3 children that Alice and Tom East Sr. had. A little Texas ranching history is that Alice East was actually the granddaughter to Richard King. I don't know if you all are familiar with Richard King, but Richard King being of the King Ranch down here in South Texas. So that's actually where I'm located. Here's a map of Texas down here. And this is South Texas. And so our biggest ranch is actually called the San Antonio Viejo. And that ranch is about 150,000 acres. Total, the East Foundation has 218,000 acres. So it's a lot of land for down here in South Texas, but Texas is a predominantly private owned state. So about 95 to 97% of Texas is privately owned. And so a little bit about me, I was born and raised here in Laredo in South Texas. I went up to Texas Tech University, where I got a bachelor's degree in environmental conservation of natural resources. I went on to get a master's degree also at Texas Tech University in wildlife science. And then I actually started a PhD at the University of Idaho. And I had, my mother unexpectedly passed away. So I came back home to South Texas to take care of my younger brother. I was kind of, I didn't know what I was gonna do at that time in my life, not the career plan that I had forged out for myself. And I was very fortunate that a position was available with the East Foundation as an educator, talking about ranching and land stewardship. And so it's kind of funny, my mom was a teacher and she always told me, you can do whatever you want, just don't become a teacher. So instead I'm a natural resource educator. But the East Foundation's mission is to promote the advancement of land stewardship through ranching, science, and education. So we run about 3,000 head of cattle on our ranches. And these are just some pictures. Here we have Zane, who's on the left, and Miguel on the right. And then we conduct wildlife science. So we're looking at Gulf Coast, Gulf Port prairie grass and its effects with fire and how we can manage that to have more forage for cattle. We also look at wildlife trends so that cattle and wildlife can coexist out on the land. This is a really cool picture. We actually have sand dunes on one of our ranches. We have about 1,000 acres of shifting sand dunes. But right here in the Oaks, this is where our ocelots hang out. We have education. So one of the big things that I am tasked with is going into the classroom, doing science presentations with the hopes that we can get students out onto the ranch. And so February, let's see, the week after Valentine's Day, we had about 1,700 eighth graders come out to the ranch over the course of the week. And we usually have students come out once a week, and we call those field lessons, and we max at capacity for 150 students that come and visit the ranch. And this is an ocelot, so an endangered species in the United States. We have 32, we've identified 32 of the remaining 80 ocelots in the United States, which is pretty cool. And we have lots of cool video on our Instagram and Facebook. But again, it goes back to managing the land for both cattle and wildlife. And so that's kind of my introduction. So I'll hand it back over to Nicole.
Thank you so much, Masi. That is all wonderful information. And thank you so much for showing the maps of where you're located. I know there's, we have 50 states. It's hard to visualize where people are. So that was really helpful in being able to see where you're located and the work you're doing. All right, so we're gonna get started with our second panelist, introduction, Rachel Aronson. So if you have something to share on your screen, please show it. If not, you can
yes.
right there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. It's great to, see educators and students and people from all over the country. My name's Rachel Aronson. I'm an educator with the Fresh Kills Park Alliance. This is a picture of what Fresh Kills Park looks like. Fresh Kills Park is in Staten Island, New York, the least populous borough of New York City, but still an awesome part of the city. It is a park that is still under construction, but when it opens, it's going to be 2,200 acres, which I thought was big until I heard Masi talk about the size of things in Texas. But in urban New York City, 2,200 acres for a park is huge. It's going to be three times the size of Central Park. And what makes Fresh Kills Park interesting is that it used to be a landfill. It was the largest landfill in the world until it closed from 1948 until 2001. It accepted all of New York City's trash. And it is now one of the largest land rehabilitation projects in the world. So this is what it used to look like over here, and this is what it looks like now. It's been capped, and we do a lot of work around ecological restoration. We do work around soil, water, and air monitoring, and are tracking the ecosystem as it regenerates in the area. So what I do, I'm the education programming coordinator, and I lead field trips. This is a picture of our mobile lab, which travels around. I lead field trips, I lead tours. The park is not open to the public right now because it's still in the process of transitioning from a landfill. So I usually bring people there in person. Right now we're doing a lot of virtual work. Obviously, New York is not open like everywhere else. We lead kayak tours, which are really fun. And to share a little bit about myself and my background, I grew up in Massachusetts, and then I went to college at the University of Vermont, where I studied cultural anthropology, focusing on the relationship between people, food, and the environment, as well as environmental studies. I then worked in in nonprofits and program management roles for a couple of years, and then realized that I was really passionate about education and working with kids. So I went back and I got a master's degree in elementary education from Hunter College. And building on this theme of career resiliency, after a year in the classroom, I learned that being a classroom teacher was not for me either, and so pivoted to being an environmental educator. So definitely the concept of bringing skills to new places really resonated with me when you brought that up, Marcia and Lucia. So excited to share more.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. It's so interesting to see where everybody is geographically, and then there's the overlap and similarities of the programming and activities that are happening on site. So I feel like there's definitely that land reclamation, then land stewardship, but then you're all like bringing all of these topics around the environment together to connect everyone, which is great. So if we want to get started with the questions, Lucia, if you want to take that away, we can get some questions answered for our panelists.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll definitely ask the first question here. And just to let you all know, we also have a student panel that's going to happen a little bit later. So right now we're going to focus on Rachel and Masi, and then we'll have some questions for our student panelists after that. So my first question, and both of you touched on this, I think, a little bit during your introductions, but how have you had to transition with your role recently because of the pandemic and the recent changes happening? I guess I'll just ask Masi to go first.
Definitely. So my position, I've been in my position for 3 years, and slowly we've been upping the number of students that actually come out to the ranch. So we started with like 3 groups coming out a semester, and I actually had 14 groups scheduled to come out this semester. And we got about halfway through before schools started canceling field trips, before schools shut down. So I think we had like close to 700 students that were supposed to come out and visit the ranch, or at least one of the ranches. We do some education on another property, but it's been a transition, talking to teachers, figuring out how I can best support them. And for them, it's kind of a lot of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Just getting in touch with their students has been their biggest thing to keep in mind. And so we're very fortunate that one of our curriculum partners, Texas Wildlife Association, has lots of on-demand webinars, and that's what teachers have really taken and used to bring into the student's classroom or into the student's home. So it's been rough for me. I've been working from home since March 9th. Schools didn't shut down until March 22nd. So, and a typical work week for me is 3 days in the classroom, 1 day out on the ranch, and then 1 day working from home. So definitely miss seeing students, talking to kids. Definitely miss going out to the ranch. It's kind of, I got to go out to the ranch and do some social media footage. And that was so fun to get outside and be outside and not have to wear a face mask. So that's kind of how my job has kind of changed.
Thank you. And now I'll just turn it over to Rachel if you just want to answer the same question of, you know, what changes you've had to make recently due to all these transitions.
Yeah, so similar to what Masi said, a lot of my job is leading field trips physically out in the park. We had like 30 field trips scheduled for this spring. I was supposed to be leading them 3 days a week, and those were all canceled. Some of them, I work with a combination of K-12 public schools and also with higher education classes. So most of the higher education classes that are meeting online have been able to transfer over to virtual tours, which was something that I needed to learn how to do. So that's been an adventure. But a lot of similarly to what you're saying earlier, very much like there isn't a lot of capacity right now in K-12 to do anything extra, including teachers that we worked with for many years are just saying, you know, we're not going to be able to do that this year. So that's been hard. Another transition is, so my organization, I work for the Fresh Hills Park Alliance, but we work really closely with the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, which has been really instrumental. So New York City, highly urban area, most people do not have lawns or any areas to go outside. So parks have become really, really important in New York City. And they've also become very controversial because I know from personal experiences, people are not necessarily social distancing there. People who are living in very crowded apartments are going there. So there have been a lot of resource and attention devoted to keeping open parks safe. And so I was saying earlier that, like, for example, we have a Parks Department car that I usually use to drive back and forth to Staten Island. And that was commandeered for the cause of transferring around essential workers to be able to monitor the parks to keep them safe. So my like physical transportation of getting to the park is no longer there. And so, yeah, so a lot of our focus has shifted to supporting the essential workers who are still in the parks doing maintenance and promoting awareness of parks as safe spaces during the pandemic.
Oh, thank you. Nicole, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. Sorry, I was something in my throat and it's hard to clear it without being loud. Sorry about that. So for either of you, with, I guess you were talking about this, Rachel, in terms of the skills that you've been using or skills that you've had to transition into using more of and learning more about. How has that taken place? Have you found that you've had to use different skills now that we're going through this COVID-19 pandemic because of the transitions? And are those skills needed to learn again? Or I guess, do you need to learn those skills again, or have you gained new ones since your transition?
I guess I can start this one. I have been doing a lot more writing than I did before. A lot of our work has become blog posts, and I've also become a grant writer because, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but this has really affected funding for a lot of my positions. So a lot of my time is now taken up with grant writing, which was something that I was doing before a little bit, but it's become a much larger part of my job. We've also been doing short informational movies about like DIY things, science projects you can do in your home. And I had to learn how to use iMovie, and like storyboard, which has actually been like extremely fun. And I had to learn how to, I've been doing, you know, those videos where you like film your hands doing things from above. I had to build like a DIY tripod out of a stack of like books and some hangers. And I feel like as an environmental educator, we really learn, you know, how to use things, how to be creative about using different materials. So that skill has definitely served me well right now, you know, turning my very small apartment into a little movie studio. So those are two things that I mentioned.
I have to agree with Rachel. So I think I'm pretty social media savvy. And so they said, you know, our headquarters office is in San Antonio. So it's about a 4-hour drive to our big ranch from our headquarters office. So they said, hey, Masi, can you go out and record footage of yourself? And so I spent about 6 hours recording footage of myself doing like a little nature walk and, you know, just different lessons that we traditionally do at the ranch during field lessons. And I went in and I was like, oh, this will take me 3 hours, like to set up the tripod, the ring light, and everything like that. And it ended up being 6 hours. I was tired at the end of the day. And of like the 6 hours of time that I actually spent, I probably only got like 20 minutes of like usable footage. And then having to explain to my supervisor, like, you know, we need a ring light because that's, you know, that's what social media influencers use, and we got to look cute for Facebook and Instagram, and we need a mic because, you know, our phone can't capture the quality that we want to put out onto social media. And then I think some of the skills that I've been trying to work on, is also working better with Excel, trying to get better at that, just because our big event, which we call Behind the Gates, where we had those 1,700 8th graders come out to the ranch, they take a pre-test and a post-test. So now I get to play with that data. So I'm trying to get better at Excel so that I don't get upset with Excel when it doesn't want to work the way I want it to work. So that's kind of some of the skills that I've been working on.
Thank you. I also just wanted to ask, maybe this goes back to things that have changed in your workplace, but if either of you usually have like interns or seasonal positions that you offer at in your workplaces, and how that has been affected, if you do have those positions, because I work with students right now, especially who some of them need internships in order to graduate. Everybody needs internships for experience, and we've been seeing a lot of cancellations or deadline or start dates pushed back for internships. So I just wondered if either of you were dealing with any of that.
So I believe with the East Foundation, our internships have been pushed back. They haven't been canceled. But one of the cool things about all the research that we do get to do on the foundation is that there's a lot of opportunity for undergraduate students to help graduate students conduct research. And unfortunately, we've had to limit volunteers for the safety of the staff on the ranch and for the safety of the volunteers, just in case, you know, something were to get transmitted. You know, graduate students are able to have, graduate students and our staff, you know, we have the protocols in place to get the help that we need should we get infected at the workplace where a volunteer would not. So that's kind of been the big push, you know, don't go to the ranch, make sure you have prior approval to go to the ranch, no volunteers unless they're a paid employee through some entity. So that's kind of what we've seen down here.
We unfortunately have had to cancel internships and seasonal positions. Right now, we were in the middle of actually hiring some seasonal workers for the summer, but there's a hiring freeze across the board in the New York City Parks Department. Actually, I'm fairly sure it's citywide at the moment due to funding. And there's also, I think that some of our research is able to continue because that's one of the benefits of having a closed park is that it's very easy to social distance. So some of the research that we do a lot of bird counts, we do soil sampling, that is continuing, but it's continuing in it's a limited staff. So I think in some of the ways that we would have previously worked with like large groups of graduate students, it's being pared down a lot. And there were those several positions over the summer for seasonals that were just canceled, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, that resource document that I mentioned in my introduction, one of the things on there are some job boards where I've still been seeing positions posted. And that's something that I'm hearing a lot from students, you know, is who's still hiring, what's still out there. You know, we don't have a comprehensive list because it's changing all the time and a lot of employers still don't quite know what's going to happen with their internships. But I will be sharing on that list just some boards that seem to still have promise, even if the internships kind of have the disclaimer of we're hiring, we don't exactly know when this can start. But if anybody like in the audience or any of the panelists have been using boards or know of any resources to add to that, feel free to add that to the chat too. So Nicole, you can ask the next question.
Okay. Again, if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to put those in the Q&A box. So my question has to do with, you mentioned this, Rachel, with the research, the graduate students are working on things, and this is more specific to the development of Fresh Skills Park and transitioning into the 2,200 acre park and development plans for that. So has that, I guess, work been put on hold? Is that going to impact who's visiting the park and who's utilizing it?
Yeah, great question. So the short answer is yes. There's some way. So Fresh Skills Park is it's being co-managed by the Department of Sanitation of New York and the Department of Parks and Recreation. The Departments of Sanitation is considered an essential service. So all of the public health monitoring that we do, that is all still happening because that's considered essential. We don't want leachate from the landfill getting into the public health, getting into the waterways because we're not monitoring them. So all of that, the maintenance is happening. We also have a capital projects. That's what a lot of what we do, which is the building of the park. There's a lot of permitting involved in that. And right now in New York State, all non-essential construction is on hold for the moment. And I think there are really larger questions of like, this is a very large and expensive project. But what we've been talking about is that like big projects take a long time, and thinking about resilience historically, like Central Park, for example, took almost 50 years to build. And I just learned that it was interrupted for 5 years by the Civil War. And the park planners were actually like, called out, and parts of it were used as a field hospital and all of this stuff. So, and then and there's a lot of other problematic stuff in the building of Central Park too, but we don't need to get into that at this particular moment. But the idea that I think like the environment is, what I find hopeful is just, the environment is much bigger than us and the timeframes that we're able to see right now. And this rehabilitation is still going to happen. It might take longer, but it's still going to happen. But yes, there has been a delay. Yeah.
And has that impacted any of what you're doing, Mossy, with around research and land stewardship?
So because we were established by the trust of Robert East in the state, we kind of have our own funding, which is, I think we're very fortunate that we don't have to rely on outside funding for our projects. I know because overall the market has been down, there has been kind of a pause on, buildings that were going to get built on the ranch and stuff like that. But it's more our partners that we work with, the universities and, different museums and different school systems that we work with. That's kind of where we've seen more of the pause of, what are they going to do once this pandemic is over? Are they going to have the funding to actually transport 150 students to a ranch? So that's kind of some questions still up in the air for next school year. So Texas has been canceled for the rest of this academic year.
Thank you for that, Mossy and Rachel. Did you have a question you want to ask Lucia? I think there's one in the Q&A.
Yeah, I can check and see what we have here. So we have an audience question here that says, and I think I like this question because it feels like a very resilience-focused question. Do you see any possible new opportunities that COVID-19 has created that did not exist before your organization or your particular work? So maybe we can just start with Mossy.
I think for us, it's been social media. So our foundation started in 2007, and I think our board and our staff members, they're a little bit more tenured, so they're a little bit more hesitant to enter the social media realm. But now that that's kind of the only way to interact with people, it's been nice to be like, oh, well, for students, TikTok is really the way to get students interested into the environment and talk about land stewardship. We haven't gone to that, but that's just, it's nice that I used to be able to joke about that, but now it's like a real thought. Like maybe we might have to do 1-minute videos on TikTok to get to the next generation of land stewardship. So that's my answer.
There have definitely been opportunities for Fresh Kills. One of them is that like Fresh Kills is still a closed site, so you can only visit via tour. So usually, even if I'm running 3 tours a week, I'm bringing like 60 people, and it's a very logistically difficult operation. People have to sign waivers. And all of a sudden I can do a webinar and like 70 people can learn about Fresh Kills Park. And we obviously could have been doing this all along, but we just never did. We also just started doing virtual tours for college classes, which is people learn about Fresh Kills, like particularly in architecture and landscape architecture classes and in urban planning classes. It's used as a case study all over the world. And we sometimes we've had visitors from Chile, from Britain, from Cuba come and see the landfill, but all of a sudden we are able to offer these virtual presentations, which we could have done, but just it was one thing after another. And I also think, I don't know if this is a benefit, but just usually my job is leading tours one after the other, and there's not as much time to step back and just be like, do I really want to be like teaching this curriculum, or what else could we be doing? So I think there has been some room to think more creatively, which has been, it's been really nice to have that space.
Good question. All right, so we have a few more minutes before we move on to the next portion, but I wanted to ask both of Masi and Rachel, how is this impacting your partnerships with other organizations, community members, students? How is this impacting those partnerships and relationships?
I'll start. For us, I think that it has really, there's some relationships that feel stronger because of this. A lot of the parks in New York City have really been working together to advocate for funding for parks, to advocate for example, parks workers are essential workers, but they're often not included in like the list of, you know, grocery workers, healthcare workers. So we've been advocating to include, when you think about who to thank and who to appreciate, think of parks worker too. So there's been a kind of a coming together of a lot of New York City parks that we've been included in, which has been nice. And we've been participating with a couple of the museums. I'll just do a shout out. The Staten Island Museum is doing a virtual Earth Day festival this Sunday that we're participating in. So everyone submitted like a little YouTube video, and so that was fun. I think that our partnerships with schools have gotten harder because schools are just dealing with so many challenges right now that that has been a relationship that I think we're going to really need to rethink how we work with schools during a time of distance learning, and what sort of support we can offer that would be really helpful.
I agree with Rachel. Partnerships with schools, that's going to be the next thing as we go into the next academic school year, making sure that teachers feel safe, administrators feel safe sending their students out to the ranch, which admittedly are probably safer at the ranch than in an urban area. But that's going to be a big thing to overcome in the next coming year. I think one of the things that East Foundation has been really great at is when we select people to build partnerships with, they're people that we know, they're like-minded organizations. We have each other's back. So right now our partnerships, even though, you know, some of our partners might be struggling or thinking about the future in terms of financial contributions, I don't see that our partnerships are wavering anytime soon, because we do support our partners as best we can.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to add, Lucia?
You are our timekeeper. Do I have time for another question, or should we move on?
One more minute. So if you think you can do 1 minute of.
I guess, yeah, I will just maybe ask each of the panelists if there are any like community groups or resources. Maybe it's an online, maybe it's a social media account or a website that you're following that has been helpful at this point, whether it's like helping you figure out how to do things differently or just kind of some emotional support. If you have anything off the top of your head that you'd like to share about.
For me, it's been working out. on a personal level. That's really helped me keep myself sane. I work out at 5 in the morning, and so at this gym called the Orange Theory, and so it's a very strict schedule. You know, you go in at 5, you finish by 6. But it's also really cool because there's a lot of teachers that work out at that time, so I am constantly still like on Facebook Messenger talking with my teachers that have come out to the ranch in one way or another, but we also work out together. So it's nice to have them. I definitely don't feel the same struggles that they are dealing with in the classroom, but it's nice to talk to them about education stuff and how we will persist and resist, be resilient in the coming months. So that's kind of what's been working for me on a personal level.
Something that's been bringing me a lot of joy and meeting some people is I've been doing an online National Geographic course for educators, which they have online free. I'm doing the Geo Inquiry course. So extra time is always great for professional development and learning. And it's like, I think it's like 100 people in this course and their discussion board. So it's been kind of an interesting networking opportunity. There are a lot of classroom teachers in there. So I've been talking to them about what they've been experiencing, sharing with them about the park. So that's a completely new network for me. I don't know anyone in there but now I'm getting to know people. So that's been a cool opportunity.
Thank you. So that's definitely something that I will want to add to the resource document. I think any of these, like, especially if they're free, any kind of webinars, whether, it doesn't have to directly be like professional development in terms of how to be a leader or something like that, but just even something that just exposes you to other opportunities within your field, or just to learn a little bit or continue to feel engaged too. Okay, Nicole, it's all you.
All right, so I think this is a good time to take a couple-minute break before we start with the student panel discussion. So before we move into the break, I just want to do another poll right quick, and this is kind of weaving into the student portion. So this is specifically for students, whether you're an OSU student or not, and it has to do with your current status as far as work. So again, that'll pop up on your screen.
And I'll just say too, like this question in particular, it's helpful for me to know as a career advisor. I assume that a number of you in the audience are SENR students, but just OSU students in general too, or students. It helps me know kind of what resources to share and what information to be putting out there and what research to be doing myself, so that I can help all of you too.
All right, so we have about 50% that said this is not applicable to them, which is good to know that we have other people on the webinar that aren't students, but it's good to kind of get that feedback from where students are currently. Thank you for filling out that. All right, we're gonna take about a 2-minute break, then we'll start with our panel discussion for the students. All right, we're gonna get started with the second portion of our program, our student panel discussion. So we have 3 students of the Ohio State University School of Environment and Natural Resources. We have Jason Velasquez, Riley McDonald, and Shane Skaggs. I wanna make sure I'm saying your last name right. So we'll have you guys introduce yourselves. We'll start with Jason, then Riley, and then Shane to talk a little bit more about your current studies and what your focus is at the school.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is Jason Velasquez. I'm currently a third-year student at The Ohio State University, majoring in EADS, or Environment, Economy, Development, Sustainability. I'm originally from Paterson, New Jersey, but I'm currently in Columbus, Ohio.
Thank you. Okay, Riley.
Hi, I'm Riley. I'm a graduating natural resource management major. I'm from Ohio. Didn't have to go too far to get to Ohio State, but I've had a couple different internship experiences and I'm pretty involved in SENR, so I'm sure I'll get into that in a little bit here.
Thank you. All right, and Shane.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Shane Skaggs. I'm a PhD student, second year in the anthropology program at Ohio State. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and I did my bachelor's at Boise State, also in anthropology. And I also did a master's degree at Oregon State in applied anthropology. And as part of that program, we had an internship requirement where I worked closely with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and their division of subsistence. So I sort of get boxed into the category of cultural anthropology, but I study a lot about ecological anthropology, and I have an SENR faculty member on my committee, and so I interact quite a bit with SENR as well.
Thank you, Shane. All right, so let's get started with our questions. Would you like to start with the first one, Lucia?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, student panelists. So I just want to ask all of you first. I'm going to let my dog into the room right now because she's pushing at the door. Just want to ask all of you how your summer and or near future plans have been affected, if they have been affected by the pandemic. And yeah, if you just want to just share that, we can just start with Jason.
Yeah, so I accepted a position to join the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program up at the University of Michigan. It's a 2-summer commitment. First summer is research, second summer is internship based. Prior to accepting that position, I was weighing my options between that program and another program. And I chose Michigan because they said they would continue to support students through the process of COVID-19 over the summer, whether that be with housing, whether that be with, safety or security or providing technology, whereas the other program didn't. So that was just interesting to navigate that and figure out which program I was going to choose for the summer. I was originally going to be in Ann Arbor conducting research. I was on a team that was looking at the connection between access to technology and environmental understanding, which now that we are doing work remotely, I'll still be in Columbus for the summer. And my project will be focused more on urban rain gardens and urban green infrastructure here in Columbus, Ohio, while also doing some more remote work in Macomb County up in Michigan.
Thank you. I will unmute Riley here.
Hi. So I, a couple months ago, accepted an internship on Sanibel Island working with sea turtles down in Florida. They kept pushing the start date back, and then a couple weeks ago they told me that they took a big budget cut and they weren't able to bring on summer staff anymore. So I started applying for a bunch of other things. I actually just accepted another position today. It's working with sea turtles in South Carolina. It's unpaid, so it's not quite as good of a gig as I had originally, but yeah, I've had to be flexible. I'm still happy to get to work with sea turtles this summer, even if it wasn't the ideal position or the one that I had hoped for.
I am a member of the Human Complexity Lab. It's run by my advisor, and he has an ongoing NSF project We work in a relatively remote Kekchi Mayan village in southern Belize. And we had been planning for some time to do about a 5-week-long service learning project in that village. And service learning projects often are ways to bring students from, pretty privileged universities down to villages to kind of get some culture. But it was very different. This is really dedicated to working with students in the village where we work, because they don't have a lot of opportunities to develop skills that will help them with getting into university, and it's just hard to get access to those things. So the project was meant to bring me and another student from Ohio State, and then 2 students from the University of Belize in the capital, Belmopan, down to the village and work with 12 young people to develop research projects, investigate things that are important to them in their village, and use things like photo voice to try and do this. So it was really disappointing to have to cancel and postpone that project this summer. Not really disappointing for us exactly, but very disappointing for those students. And then on top of that, it's just like, because fieldwork is such a big part of what we do, it's like there's a lot of concerns about, could we be the ones potentially carrying and transmitting something to a remote village? And so that's on the minds of a lot of field workers, especially people that are working in remote communities. And then the other thing that I'll say is that I'm in a position where I have some funding over the summer. I'm able to work as a GRA, and I have some external funding sources, but I wanted to speak on behalf of some of my peers who are really sort of vying for teaching assistantship positions. And the shifts to largely virtual learning, it's not totally clear how much that's really going to like bottleneck those opportunities, and whether it's going to just make it much more competitive, whether they're just going to reduce the number of teaching positions. And so those are things that are definitely weighing heavily on the minds of graduate students, and especially graduate students that are considering whether to finish with their master's and try and do something else, or continue on as a PhD student. So those are some of the main things that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Shane. So I'm going to move on to the next question. And this is, again, thank you, students and environmental professionals, again, for doing this. This is much appreciated. All of your perspective and knowledge on what you do and what's going on behind the scenes is really helpful. So this is a question for all the student panelists. Are you finding it difficult to remain connected to your peers, professors, employers in terms of staying connected and getting more information with the work that you're doing, or even just on a personal level with these transition from the pandemic?
I went ahead and unmuted Jason so that you could start.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I think, given that I have access to technology, a strong Wi-Fi connection in an urban setting, it hasn't been hard for me to stay connected to people. I think there's a new found level of social anxiety that exists now, where the assumption is being made that because you're home, you have more time, or you're not doing other things. And so there's always a constant request for, hop on a Zoom meeting. Let's connect via Zoom, hop on FaceTime, call me, text me. And it doesn't really work that way when you shouldn't be having to expend more energy than you were prior to this pandemic and prior to being in the distance learning mode, or in social distancing from friends or family or whatever. So it's kind of hard for me, it's hard to balance, understanding that I am in a privileged situation where I do have access to technology and can continue to communicate, while also understanding that it's a lot to be put in a situation where everything is hop on a Zoom, let's schedule a Zoom, as if there's more time in the day, because I'm sitting in my room or sitting in my living room doing work that I should have been doing, whether or not I was at home or not.
Thank you, Jason. I think that's something that I've thought about a lot recently. Have kind of talked with peers about, and I try to be careful to not say like, now that we have all this time or something, but I do find it slipping out because it's easier to think that way. But when you're the one who actually has all these things to do and all these expectations, you realize that it's not really just about time, it's also about energy as well, and just your own kind of personal space. So great. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute Riley now.
Yeah, so it definitely has been an adjustment to get used to this. A lot of the people that I work with and work for have been pretty flexible. People I was already meeting with on a weekly basis, those have moved to Zoom, and that's worked out pretty well. But it is hard to be juggling everything, being at home. My whole family is working from home here. Like our Wi-Fi is getting overloaded by everyone being on Zoom calls all day, every day. But yeah, it's been difficult, especially in my classes for group projects, not being able to communicate with people during classes and trying to like track them down and like working on a Google Doc at the same time. Professionally, it hasn't been as much of a challenge, but for classes especially, it's been a struggle so far. Especially this all happened like right before final season was supposed to start. So it's just that time of year is so difficult already, and then doing it all virtually is definitely interesting.
Thank you, Riley. And I'll just go ahead and unmute Shane here.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I want to second what Riley and Jason are both saying. I mean, there is a perception that we're home and we can kind of just be available. Having access to Wi-Fi, I'm able to stay connected. But I want to highlight, I guess, kind of two ends of the spectrum of that connection. Like, so there's been really good experiences and really not so great experiences. One, I'll highlight the not so great one first. I've been in some meetings and sort of, when we're on campus, we have these weekly sort of research meetings and things, and people have been motivated to try and keep those going virtually, which initially we were all like, yes, we can do this. But there were some that decided to just sort of make it open-ended, and it really just created this echo chamber of like, what is going on? What are we going to do? It's never going to be the same. And it was really frustrating, to just constantly be bouncing that back and forth. I think it's real and it's worth talking about, but when it was open like that, it was like, this is depressing and hard to just keep listening to. But on the other hand, there have been lots of meetings that had structure, that set out with specific goals for the virtual setting and how they were going to facilitate that. And those meetings were great. They lost the sort of like small pleasantries of being in person and like meeting up and, small talk before. But when they were facilitated well, they were great, and it speaks to like a sort of a different kind of skill set that people really need to be aware of if they're going to expect people to be virtual with them regularly. And I'll just add that most graduate students have been very stressed out about trying to do their committee meetings and thesis defenses and dissertation items and those things. I haven't experienced that yet, but I have a committee meeting on Monday, and it's like my first real big one. So I'm kind of like, this is going to be weird. Like, this is the first time most of us are like really meeting in the same room. And so we can stay connected, but it's not always ideal. So, but make the most of it. I think you're muted.
I hit it again and it muted me again. Thank you all for answering that question. We have about 17 minutes. And we can go longer. I feel like this is a good enough of a conversation. We can go over time a little bit. But I wanted to go back to the panelists, the environmental professional panelists, to ask a question around the same context of how you've been able to manage and stay connected to your colleagues, coworkers, partners on a regular basis during this time.
So I'll go first. So I'm the only, from my organization, I'm the only person in Laredo. So a lot of when I meet with other staff or partners, it's either I'm traveling somewhere or they're traveling somewhere unique. I mean, I drive about 2,000 miles a month, you know, just for work prior to the pandemic. And, you know, this month I submitted my mileage and it was like 100 miles. So it's been quite a shift in, like, you know, now I kind of do have all this free time because I'm not driving or answering emails off an iPhone. I actually can open up my laptop and like do a real response, which has been nice. But definitely making the shift to Zoom meetings, helping, you know, other staff members coordinate technology and making sure that they know how to log on to Zoom, and so that we can do everything that we can, has also been a challenge. But, you know, I think these are skills that, you know, going into the future, we're just going to be more mindful of, and hopefully it makes us more productive in the long run. That's kind of been it for me.
Thank you, Masi.
For us, I have a pretty small team. There are only 6 of us who work at Fresh Kills. And we've been meeting every morning, even if just for like 5 minutes, just to see each other's faces. And we go around and say what we're doing that day, which I think I had some concerns that it wasn't going to be, that it was going to be unstructured, but it actually has been really nice we meet at 9 a.m., which has been helpful for me because I'm like, okay, gotta start the day now and see other people's faces. So that's been helping with structure. And all of us are kind of in peer groups based on what we work on. I'm the only educator who works there. So I've been on calls for environmental educators in the New York City area that have been meeting a lot to discuss common issues. And I know that the person on our team who does science and research has been on calls of researchers who work on similar things. So I think there's been a lot of like issue area groups meeting, which has just to share strategies and talk about ideas. So that's been a good way to stay connected.
I'm sorry, Rachel, your mic is making a lot of noise. I didn't get that last part that you said.
Oh, okay. Technical difficulties. Is this better?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just I think it's from your headphones. It's making a sound in the background.
Is this better now?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it was my heater. Very loud. And so I was just saying that a lot of us were meeting in addition to our team meeting together, we're meeting by issue areas. So I have groups I meet with other environmental educators. There are calls and webinars that are going on that I've been going to, and the person on our team who does science and research at the park she is in part of a grassland working group. And so her grassland working group has been meeting remotely just as often as they were before. So I think that those kind of issue areas, that networking has been really helpful to see what different people are doing.
Thank you. So going back to the students, and this is for all of you, if kind of think about planning in terms of context, have you thought about changing the plans that you've originally had as it pertains to your work, or have kind of had to take a step back to see what that's going to look like within the next few months, as far as changing your goals or tasks that you had planned before the pandemic? And you should be able to unmute yourselves, panelists. Sorry, that was an issue earlier.
I can go first on this one. I have like an external funding source that goes for a number of years, so I'm kind of in for whatever the next 3 years is. So I haven't thought about it in that way, but I did want to share that, as graduate students, there's a lot of pressure to be very specialized. And I think in the long run, you do end up with some specializations that are, you know, core to the topics that you study. But I tried very hard to resist that in some ways by having a variety of methods that I could use. And we have, through the anthropology program, we have an anthropology public outreach program. So that works on outreach, has a variety of things. So I've gotten involved in that. And then also I do, field work and things. And so, once the pandemic hit, a lot of these certain activities were just canceled or postponed. And prior to the pandemic, I felt like I was juggling like a lot of things. Like I had all these little irons in the fire that I felt like weren't going anywhere. And I was like, man, like maybe I'm spread too thin. But then, these kinds of uncertainties happen, and I had things to fall back on, and I had ways that I could shift gears and still be involved in things. And so having diversified a bit within my field ended up being really important for me now. And I think so planning wise, that's definitely something I'm going to take very seriously as I consider what I'm involved in and how I'm involved in it.
Jason or Riley?
Okay.
Oh.
There we go. Got it. So I think for me, as someone who's looking to start the graduate school process, it's been a lot of, instead of it being about, what professors have I connected to, what are some of the top programs that I'm looking for, it's sort of shifting to how are these schools treating students during the pandemic. That's weighing a lot more on my search and my list now than it has before. And it's also trying to figure out, okay, I have lists of schools I can't really visit. That was going to be my plan this summer, to go around visiting schools, seeing what cities I liked best, where I wanted to physically be. It's all virtual now. Practice for the GRE, it's all online now. The GRE is probably going to be online for the next couple sessions. So that's another thing. Applications connecting with students all online, where I was going to physically be there in person. So it's an interesting transition to just try to figure out how to do that. As a first gen student, it's like you already don't know how to navigate the grad school process. So now how do you do it when nobody else knows how to do it as well, because it's all online? So that's kind of what I'm dealing with here.
Yes, I feel like, that's definitely something. I'm a first gen. I was first gen, and having a big family and trying to figure out how to navigate moving from Cleveland to Columbus was just being an undergrad, and even just moving away from my family was enough stress for me. So having to think about that in terms of the whole world, in a sense, being affected by COVID-19 is, it's a lot to try to process in a short amount of time. So it is, taking sometimes 1 minute at a time versus a day at a time, because things have been changing so frequently. I think that puts things into perspective of, each of us has something that we're battling. It could be multiple things, at one time, but finding those, I think, support systems to help get through that is really key, because we all don't have, the answers, but knowing that you have, a network or someone to talk to at least about it really helps kind of put things into perspective in a more manageable way versus, I'm in this by myself. I don't have the support I need.
And I'll also just share, because I've been hearing from some students who are about to graduate and are now reaching out to me saying, well, I thought I was going to look for a job, but I think now I might look at grad schools. a little bit more seriously. I thought maybe I was going to wait a few years, but want to have that as an option. And I definitely work with students. Jason, you know, if you're trying to navigate that process, like Nicole said, we don't have all the answers, and it's new for us too. And every grad program is different as well, but I enjoy helping students kind of working through and trying to decipher these different programs and what that all looks like. So I'm always happy to help with that as well.
Thanks, Lucia. So I'm going to ask a question in the chat box for anybody that's still in the audience. And I know a few of you had to drop off. You have other things going on, which is totally fine. But if you're still here, thank you for continuing to be a part of the conversation. And this just has to do with thinking about resources or things that would be helpful for you as a student, as a professional, to think about in terms of moving forward and still being able to build those relationships and connections professionally. So feel free, panelists and audience or attendees can answer.
And maybe while people are typing that in, if anybody from our student panel wants to share, Jason kind of shared maybe, you know, trying to navigate some of that grad school process could be helpful. If either of you could think of if there's anything that might be helpful for you or that has been helpful for you too, if there are any resources or groups that are already working. And if you need to share your screen or anything like that to show anything, you're welcome to do that as well.
Back when I was in grad school in Texas, you couldn't be denied admission based on your GRE score. So that made me feel nice.
That's a big thing for so many students is what's this whole GRE thing and do I have to do it and how important is it? And it usually depends on the program. But yeah, that's great that you didn't have to worry about it as much maybe.
I'll just mention that, you know, had I been, you know, having gone through the grad school sort of application process and thinking about what might have been weighing on my mind if it were during a pandemic. I mean, I guess the thing that's been the most relevant is that, you know, grad students, at least I've felt this way, and I think other grad students do, is you kind of feel like a lone wolf researcher type, like you're applying individually, these are my skills and I want to do this. But it's actually been like the important thing for me in this time has been being part of a lab and a team that has a variety of things going on. I'm sure that is a big part of people's application to grad school, but you know, if I was applying to it again, I would certainly be looking at programs and being like, okay, like this is a cool advisor, this is a cool program, but do they have projects and research groups that are going to allow students to be involved and facilitate their, you know, participation? Because it's in those settings that I've actually been able to stay connected and continue working on things.
Thank you for that. And I also just want to kind of, you know, I think in terms of themes, and I think I've been hearing when I go back to career resilience, just kind of as we're wrapping up here, a number of you talked about kind of having backup plans or, so Riley, I know that your internship that you worked really hard to get fell through, and within like a week or so, you applied to a number of other positions, reached out to, you know, connections, and you were able to find a few other options and accepted another offer. And even though it wasn't like your dream internship, it's still better than not having anything at this point. Jason, you shared that there were 2 different programs that you could choose from. And so you were able to kind of look and see which one, you know, was going to work best with with the current circumstances, the one that was still continuing. But if you'd only applied to the one that wasn't going to work out, then it might be harder to find that plan B. And that's something that carries through beyond pandemics, right? Not to put all our eggs in one basket, and just to, like Shane is saying as well, having groups and communities that we can kind of lean on and connect with as well.
So in the environmental educators, are there any, I guess kind of thinking about this skills development and building resilience, is there anything that you think would be a good resource, or at least something to look into as far as developing those professional skills that might be helpful for students moving forward?
I don't have a specific resource, but I have a thought, which is that I've been part of a lot of conversations about how COVID-19, I think that when I first went into, when we first went into social distancing, it was like, maybe we'll be here for 2 weeks and then we're going to go back to how things were. And now there's a real awareness that like, this could be a year or more, and we're never going to go back to how things were. And as environmental professionals, I think we understand that that is not, like, the way things were was not necessarily a good way for things to be, in many different ways. So I think that looking at this moment as a real like opportunity for changing how we think about how we do things is a really useful skill set. A lot of organizations, including the one that I'm in, are in a moment where we just are guessing and we don't really know what's going on. And specific skills like knowing how to use social media, knowing how to relate to people online, which are skills that a lot of people who are maybe more established don't actually have. So I think that being in school and learning to adjust during this time of the pandemic is going to be a really marketable skill, because this is going to, people don't know what they want right now. I also think that I'm unsure about whether this would work for like my particular organization, but I think that we're really open to trying different things right now. So if you have an idea about how people can relate, or an idea about a research project, or idea about a mentorship or an internship that isn't even posted, I think that people are really open to different ideas right now. So I would suggest maybe looking beyond what organizations are saying that they need, because people just don't know what they need right now, and saying like, what can I offer that would be interesting, and how can I convince this organization that would help them? That's something that I would say.
I like that you said that, because it is a good, even though we as professionals and as students are sometimes uncertain with how we're going to move forward with continuing to learn and develop skills, like we still in a way have our strengths that we can market to organizations and to show them, and I feel like there's certain industries or professions where we're highlighting our creativity, but it's still kind of downplayed. So I feel like going through this chaotic situation has presented an opportunity for college students in particular to show that creativity and to show, why it's still something to be highlighted when looking for employees in these fields of work, because we really do have to think more on our feet and do a lot more problem solving in a short amount of time. So I think having those skills to just be creative and think outside of the box is even more like of a thing now. So you bringing that up, I got really excited, because it's just like, this is a time to just, discover and explore more things, and who knows what that's going to turn into as far as, I guess people being hired, or, how we change our hiring practices when it comes to the organizations and businesses that we work for, that might come into consideration as well.
Yeah, and I'll add, I already, before all of this, talked to students about make sure before you're even going out there applying for jobs or, deciding what you want to do next, just take some time to really, maybe it's journaling, maybe however it is that you process this, but really think about, what do you have to offer? What are your skills? What are your interests? And I talked a little bit about transferable skills as well. and then figure out how you want to talk to people about that and how you want to talk to people about yourself. Because we can't expect employers to totally understand where we would fit within their organization. Some of our students have majors, major names that are really recognizable by employers. Some have major names that aren't as much, like the EADS major that we have to abbreviate because it's so long, but each of those words is important and means something. But it is up to that student to really voice how they could fit into an organization. And sometimes that's showing them that they need something that they don't know that they need. And so that takes some guts and takes some practice, but I think this could be a particular opportunity to be doing that as well. I think this has all been like just really great conversation. I don't want to cut us off, but I also want to be mindful of our panelists. Probably had kind of an end time in mind and they have things to do. And so maybe just going off of the theme of just because we're all at home, we don't all just, have a lot of extra time. And so Nicole, was there any other like poll or anything that you wanted to share?
No, that was the last one, is the one that I asked in the chat. But yeah, this has been really, really helpful in just helping me think more about what I can do within the Environmental Professionals Network to stay connected with professionals within Ohio and outside of Ohio, because it really does, I think, have to do with thinking outside of what we're used to, especially in these uncertain times, and finding ways to broaden our networks and connections to one another within this field of work. And that could be sustainability, that could be natural resources, the environment in general. We all have a role and we all are learning at the same time. So I think finding ways to connect more of those dots is going to make us stronger.
Great. Oh, I thought maybe I was muted. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everybody in the audience who tuned in. I know sometimes it's hard to think of things to share while you're also trying to listen to other people. And so if you do think of anything else later, and I think Rachel had a good point, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a resource with a link, but if you just have any ideas or tips or advice that it might make sense to go into that document that I'm going to share out to everybody who participated, please feel free to email me. My email is on this slide. It's hadela.1@osu.edu, and I put Nicole's information up there too in case you want to connect with us. We'll also reach out with a survey just to kind of follow up and see if you'd like anything additional. Maybe it's something a little bit more formalized. I think the conversations are great, but if you want me to like come up with some content and deliver it to you a little bit more lecture style with maybe a few guests joining in, then it just would be helpful. So we'll ask for some feedback to know what you might want to see in the future.
Yes, and I'm definitely open to that. Continuing these webinars of just getting more perspectives and a better understanding of how we can bring those resources together to get things moving for students and giving them opportunities to reach out and stay connected. So again, thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to the panelists, Masi, Rachel, Jason, Shane, Riley. You all have been wonderful. I appreciate your time, and hopefully you guys are continue to stay safe and be well, and don't forget to wash your hands.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.